Welcome back, Autobots, Decepticons, and everything in between to another episode of Theorymus Transformers Tribune. And in today's episode, we got someone really special on. His name is Shaun Stephenson, and he was a 3D modeler for Transformers Dark of the Moon. He's most famous for modeling the traitorous Sentinel Prime as well as the Autobot Wrecker Topspin. Mr. Stephenson, I'm proud to have you on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's doing great. Like I said earlier, I really appreciate you, getting my call back because I don't get that many. So
Oh,
thank
no,
you.
my pleasure. Happy to help.
So I guess a great way to kick this off is how did you get involved with the production of Transformers 3?
Good question. So I've been working at ILM for a little while. I've been actually, ILM was my first job in film, in VFX. Before that, I'd worked in video games for many years, which you can maybe touch on. And I was actually working at LucasArts, the very famous video game company owned by George Lucas. We'd been working on The Force Unleashed. That was the last project I worked on there, which is a Star Wars game. Production on that wrapped, and then we were actually working on kind of a top secret project for George himself, and that had been in pre-production for quite a long time. And then we went through what, in hindsight, turned out to be the first of many sets of layoffs at LucasArts in the sort of build up to the Disney buyout.
Okay.
So I was on a project, and pretty much all of my team got laid off unexpectedly. So it was
Oh,
one horrendous day where HR came into our room and started just taking people out, and we never saw them again. It was like really weird. And at the end of it, there was myself and the producer left. That was it. We were the only people who were kept on. And I said to the producer, what do we do now? And he said, I don't know. I had some friends in ILM, and I said, they were literally in the floor above us. And I said, can I talk to them? And he said, yeah, no problem. So I went and talked to them, and I got taken on at ILM, and I'd actually worked on a few projects before. So typically I think in film in general, but certainly at that time at ILM, it was all contract.
hmm.
So you work, for a show typically, which could be 6 weeks, 6 months. It depends on the number of shots and various other things. So I'd worked on a couple of projects before Transformers, and I was, happy to be kept on after the previous show wrapped, and that's what I was moved on to. And honestly, it was kind of baptism by fire a little bit for me because I'd never really done any character-based stuff. That's not really my area of expertise. But they had belief in me, and yeah, I came on board and didn't see it all the way to the end. But again, that's based on contracts. But I was there for, I'm not sure how long I was on that project for. It could have been about 4 or 5 months, maybe more, maybe a little bit more.
Okay. Well, it's pretty awesome. At least you didn't get laid off. That's horrible.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of it in the games industry.
So, I guess once you finally got involved with the production,
Mm.
kind of what was the first thing you were tasked with working on?
The first two things that I did actually were because I think at the time when I joined, it's gone back a long time, so memory's a little fuzzy, but I
Oh, no
believe
worries.
we didn't have full concept for any of the new Transformers.
Oh, really?
You know, typically how it works is, we're essentially work for hire, right? So we're a visual effects shop that bid on the show and on certain sets, on certain shots, sorry, and then concept and everything comes from the actual movie house, right, from Universal or Paramount, whoever it might be. So I think we were waiting for final concept. So we knew we needed some updates to some of the models from the previous shows. So I actually was given fairly small updates, honestly, for the most part, compared to making something brand new. I was given the task of updating Optimus and Bumblebee. So that was the first two things I did, just really to get into the sort of the language of Transformers and how the parts looked and learning the tools. There was some very specific tools for that production. So that was the first two things I did with some updates.
That's awesome. Now I know when it came to Optimus and Bumblebee, because I know the main changes for them, like with Optimus, he got like these new forearm pieces, and the main thing was like this new abdomen section. I was
Yeah.
always wondering, was there a reason why they decided to give him those abs, or is that just like a design choice?
I design choice, I think. I wish I knew. Typically it's very compartmentalized in VFX, so we're typically just given, here's the concept, here's the changes, off you go, run with it. And because the visual effects are, again, they have to bid on the show, right? So everything is is very tightly controlled as far as budget's concerned. So we don't have the luxury like we do in games where we can just sort of experiment with things and ask questions. We typically blast on through there. So I had very little time to do those things. So I wasn't given any specific explanation, honestly, but I was given some. For those two, I think I was given sketches, but not really solid concept art, if I remember rightly.
Yeah,
I was working with the art
correct on that.
director a little bit on that. Yeah.
Because there is this image of Optimus with it, but it's not like that ILM render. And Bumblebee had the same thing, so I assume it was kind of the same thing when he got that new chest piece, and I believe parts on his back were like
The back
redone.
was the specific what I remember. I'm getting a little fuzzy on everything I did, but I definitely clearly remember doing the stuff on the back on Bumblebee.
Yeah,
for
because
sure.
they got because he became a new Camaro when he had like this spoiler, and then
Yeah.
replaced the light bar that was on the
That's
back.
right.
So that's one of my
That's what
favorite
that was.
designs for him. It's really cool.
Yeah. So I did work on that. And the chest, it was changed a little bit on Optimus. And I can't remember exactly, but I do remember changing the chest and the abs. You reminded me about that. That's absolutely the areas that I was working on. So I worked on those two while we were waiting for other stuff to come through.
So, I mean, that's awesome. I just love talking about this because this is information a lot of fans just don't have it all. So
Sure.
it's really
Yeah,
cool.
and to us, it's just, hey, it's just a job. So it's interesting that you guys, it's nice to document it, I guess. Interesting you guys take so much interest in it.
So I know the main thing which when I looked at your art station, because this thing came years after, I'm like, oh my god, there's new renders of Sentinel and Topspin. I'm like, holy crap, because you usually do not see that. So I guess I want to move on to Sentinel Prime because
Sure.
he's like the big bad, the main villain. How did you go about modeling him? Like, did you have the concept? Did you kind of idea it? Like, how was the process?
So the process was interesting. So I'd actually been working on, we'll talk about Topspin later, but I've been working on Topspin first.
Okay.
And then I was actually taking off him to work on Sentinel Prime. I guess the concept came through and they needed someone to work on him, and it was, the big guy. So all I had initially was, we actually got, I can clearly remember seeing a sheet, a one page, which had all of the new robots on it. But they were, they were small. They were just like,
it was a scale
thumbnails.
chart.
Yeah, they were basically thumbnails. It was scale chart, but it was more like, I guess whoever was in charge of production who got individual sheets for all of them, but they were very sketchy.
Okay.
And they'd then gone and put them on one sheet just so we could see all of them. So it was that was the first thing I got to start on. And what we did, and actually this was across the board on all of the new robots, we actually had our lead, our visual effects supervisor, went through and made really basic models of all of them, right? And that was mainly to get just the silhouette and the scale. So he did, game res, old school game. I've been working in games since PlayStation 1. So this was like PlayStation 2 sort of resolution characters, really just looking at the shapes and the form and the silhouette. He did that for all of them. To get a sort of an initial sign off. So I got access to that model. And then I also got a 3/4 shot concept, which is a full concept. It was literally just, like a 3/4 perspective view of him from the front. And he was posed. I can't remember exactly how he was posed. I do remember he was posed. And he had that sword that he has sort of stand by him. So I got that, and that was it really. I was told just run with this. Now, we did build up over the two projects prior kind of a library of pieces, because we're working on things that come from cars, that come from trucks. There's a lot of similar bits, even if it's just like a bolt. There's no point in reinventing the wheel again and again. So we did have a library of those things. So I started by really fleshing out the big shapes, so the big body pieces that were unique to him and to his vehicle, and then adding in things like, pistons and actuators and bolts and pipes and all that kind of stuff. And some of them were hand built, and some of them were taken from the asset library. And that's really how we fleshed it out. But yeah, the only concept I had was the front 3/4. So the back, that's a different story. That was a mystery.
Okay, so then that's the next question I had, because on your model specifically with Sentinel's back, he has these awesome 4 capes, while in the film we only had 2. So I assume you kind of have to go off of, the silhouette on that.
So what happened there was, I was allowed sort of free rein to an extent, but remember all this stuff had to go back to the actual movie studio to get into the director, right, to get sign off. So I remember doing like a first pass of like the spine and the ribs and the shoulders and all that basic structure, but I had no idea how that back cape looked. I knew there was one, but I had no idea about it. So we were also in ILM. We were called the digital model shop. So we made the models, but we also had a concept team, and they were the art department essentially. So I went to the art department and got one of their senior guys to take a look at my model, and then he did some drawovers for me. And so he actually came up with the whole notion of the four-way cape at the back, which I modeled. The reason it changed, that was actually after I left, I believe. So, again, I come back to earlier contract. So my contract ran out. You paid hourly, and it all comes into the budget, right? So essentially my contract ran out, and I actually moved on after Transformers. So I'm guessing, and I don't know this for sure, I'm guessing one of the full-time artists who were there probably took it over and made changes. And my assumption is that just came from feedback from the studio.
I see. Well, I really like the four cape design more than the two.
Yeah, I thought it looked kind of cool.
It's so cool.
It was interesting.
And he's like,
it has a lot more scope for movement, and I think that was kind of partially why the concept guy came up with it as well. Is one big chunky piece, you can't really, it doesn't. I guess it's not as open to animation because they're essentially just steel strips, right?
Yeah.
And if they're in four pieces, you can have a lot more motion there. But yeah, I'm assuming it just came back from the director.
Well, that's awesome. So, this is another question I had with Sentinel. So I don't know if you did this, but I know you modeled his Earth mode. So when he's like the fire truck based on the tires. Now in the movie, he has like two more modes. He's like when he's on the moon, he has like, it's basically the same
at the
model.
start of the film, right?
Yeah. And at the end of the film, he has all this battle damage on him. Were you responsible for those as well?
Damage, no. I don't know who did that. Honestly, I wish I did. We had another department called Digimat. And then we also had a very specific character department, so it could have come from either of those. Digimat tend to do background stuff, so it probably wasn't them. It probably came from, we had some character artists who were, we call them creature artists, who were very, very much more into like sculpting, so using ZBrush. So I'm assuming it came from them, but that certainly wasn't me. The moon at the start, I did do some of that. So and I remember doing that quite late in the project, actually. So I'm assuming it was because I did all of the head and everything, like very specifically. It's one of the first things I detailed out. So I didn't do like the body, etc. for the moon, and I'm not sure it changed very much, honestly.
It was the same, just the tires were changed.
Right. So you remember it zooms into the eye and all the pieces start moving around. So I did the design for that. So that was one of the things they did on there. And we really had, a fairly sketchy piece of concept. So it was a matter of just making it more interesting, more spiky, and lots of layers of movement that we could have going on. So I did, again, I'm not sure if it's exactly the same in the movie as what I did, but I definitely did the first pass on that for sure.
Oh, that's awesome, because that scene is just so cool because it goes into his eye and then has like the title screen.
Right.
Still, I think that's the best intro they did. Revenge of the Fallen's really a close second, but that one blew me away.
Yeah, it is really nice. I liked it when it was animated because I never saw an animated version of that until the movie was out. So that's the first time I saw it. But yeah, I did all of those kind of rings of detail in there.
That's cool, man. And I guess another thing with Sentinel. Now this is like what people hate him for is when he kills Ironhide, he uses like this cannon, this rust gun. Now I know in your concepts you show the sword and the shield, but were you also responsible for creating his weapon?
No, I don't remember ever where that came from. That one is a bit of a mystery to me. I did do some weaponry for Transformers, but it wasn't that. So yeah, I don't know where that came from. It could have been another artist. It could have been an outside vendor potentially, or it could have been just kit bashed together from other pieces. But definitely wasn't me. It is cool, though, I agree.
And this is another question with Sentinel. I don't know if you had a part in this, but early on, like this is in the teaser trailer and some of the old concept arts, he was yellow, but then he became red. Did you know why that happened?
No, actually, I don't. I believe that was probably very early because the first concept I got, he was already red. Yeah, so I'm not sure about that one. Yeah.
All right, so let's see here. So when it came to Sentinel Prime, I guess since he's such a complicated robot, what was the most challenging part of doing that? Because you said your base wasn't like in creatures. So how did you do that?
The most complicated part, honestly, was once the first pass had been done, because there's a lot of internal structure, not just in him, but maybe more so in him than some of the robots, but especially in him. There's a lot of internal things, like just underneath the surface, which you can see in certain animations. So lots of, like I said, actuators and pistons and tons of piping and tubing and all that kind of stuff. And although the intention with each Transformers movie was that we would like to get it to work correctly. The reality was the models were so complicated and the time was like so limited that really it doesn't. And that's kind of why a lot of the transformations are very quick with auto motion blur, right? So you don't see the stuff that doesn't work. But that was a big, we tried to get it so at least it was reasonable. And a lot of the problem is when you are making something that complicated with lots of internal architecture, you can sort of take a best guess about how things should be placed relative to each other, but you have no idea what's going to happen when we call it a rig, right? It's like skeleton is put inside it and it's animated. You've got no idea what the animators are going to do or how any of that deformation is going to work. So the real challenging part was get that second pass done. So how we actually ended up approaching that was I did the first pass model and I sent it off to the rigging team. And I worked very closely with one of their tech artists. And he literally came back to me very quickly, actually, with a new version of the model with the rig. But he had, I don't know if you know what this means, but he'd vertex colored. So each polygon is made of vertices, right? The little points. And you can actually color those vertices, which then puts a color onto the model. So he came back with a vertex colored version of the model, which essentially was like a little key. Green is good, right? Don't need to touch this geometry. Blue, I seem to remember, was like, maybe we need to look at this. And red was like, we have to fix this. So, it was things like, a pipe that would intersect right through an arm piece when it was animated. So we needed to work together to figure out where that pipe can go so it'll deform better. We did a pass on fixing all the red pieces, and then the blue stuff. Some of it we lived with, some we had to tweak a little bit. But yeah, it was really a really useful back and forth between me and the tech artist doing that stuff.
Yeah, well, that's pretty cool because, with them being such complicated beasts, sometimes if you, like, I watch these films, like, in Premiere, frame by frame, because I'm just a geek.
Right, I'm sure you're going to see some stuff.
You just see a little bit of clipping, so you don't really notice it unless you, like, really look. So, I mean, you guys did a killer job. And I guess with Sentinel, this is another thing, because I know you said you talked about his vehicle, which is this massive, beautiful airport fire truck that's not FFA regulated because it's red, should be yellow, which is the coolest thing, because, like, I believe in the interview, Bay's like, I don't want it yellow, it doesn't look cool enough, so we need red and black, and it just looks so cool.
I think red is the color, right? It's what you associate with, like, fire engines and things, so.
So I guess the question is, because I know the main part you can see with Sentinel is those big off-road tires in his chest and his legs, and I get his chest is the windows. Like, so was there any part of the truck that you also incorporated? Because I assume there's more pieces, but it's kind of hard to tell because he's like a knight.
Right, yeah, and I'm trying this, going back a long time. I need to look at the model. What I can tell you is we didn't really get the truck and then take pieces from it, right? So. We pretty much made everything from scratch.
Oh, really?
We didn't really honestly reference the truck very much. And again, like the thing about, you mentioned Michael Bay. So the thing about Michael Bay is, and I discovered a lot of things about Michael Bay during making this movie. But one of the things I discovered was, if the model you present him for sign off is not as close to 100% exact to the concept as possible, he'll reject it. And that was why we couldn't really take too much license, in terms of taking pieces from a truck or from whatever and putting it in there to make it more authentic, because it would have been rejected. And I've got an example of that from the backpack, the jetpack that he had, that Optimus had. That was a particularly interesting one. But yeah, no, we didn't really reference the truck at all, particularly.
I see. So I guess that scores all my main questions, Sentinel, and that's pretty cool information. The geeks on TFW are gonna love this, and so as my subscribers as well. So I guess when it came to Topspin, which he's like right here, I have like a Sentinel Prime Topspin figure. I love Topspin. He's so cool. He has like the little hair and everything.
I know, it's such a shame he was cut from the movie, more or less.
That's one thing I was wondering, because when you emailed me that, I'm like, he was cut? Because I know he's a background. Could you? Okay, I guess before we get to that, we should probably go down the list. So I guess when it came to Topspin, was it kind of the same process that it was with Sentinel as well?
It was exactly the same process. But earlier on, I mentioned that I was working on him, and then I was told like, hey, you need to move Sentinel. So I probably got him to like, again, this has gone back a long way, but I probably got him to like 70% done. And then because I was taken off him to a Sentinel, it was given to another artist who'd been there for a while to finish him off.
Hmm.
But his main structure was I seem to remember what was missing was one of the arms, maybe the left arm. I don't think I'd finished, and maybe a bit of the chest.
Yeah. So what I was able to see with the model, the only really main thing I could notice that was different, and this is going off by memory, was that his arms were there. He just didn't have the guns on his back or on his
That might be it.
arms. And then
Right,
something
that
really
might be it.
cool that I did see on him is when you did the tires, they seemed as they came from Bumblebee, but for the film they changed it to like the race NASCAR things. I'm like, wait a minute, I've seen that. That's so cool because
Yeah.
you never get to see these early Previs models, if
Right.
ever. So that was like really cool to see. So was that something that came from like the Transformers assets library that you used? As
I
a
believe
placeholder?
that probably did. I can't think of any other way, and I don't remember we had such good concept for him either. So probably then we were kind of given a little bit more license initially until we got the approval. I seem to remember that the reason I switched across to Sentinel was because that concept came through, and when you got the concept, you should work with it. So I think that's probably why that was. Yeah, we probably just used what we had because we didn't know what else it was supposed to be, essentially.
All right. So
I did
I
like his hair though. I thought the idea of him having the crash net as the hair was really
that
cool.
is the coolest thing. The little
Yeah.
crash, and I love that so
Yeah,
much.
so the render I have of him, I don't know if you noticed that it's flat. The hair's flat. It's
Yeah,
almost like it just spins out from it. It's not like it doesn't drape like hair. That's because the hair was simulated, right? So we did physics simulation on that. So I made the hair, but one of the tech artists put a physics simulation, so it flopped and then it kind of hung over his shoulders correctly.
that's really cool. He's like only one of the few characters I've here. I think Wheeljack or Q also had it as well. The Topspin is just crashing. How does that
Such a
work when he transforms? I don't know. It
I
just
know,
looks
I don't know
cool.
either, but who cares? It's like, yeah, I liked it. I was very sad that he was not in the movie very much because there was some more shots that he was supposed to be in, and they were just edited out or cut. So,
Yeah,
however, it works on the cutting room floor, right? I don't know.
because that's the new information. Because when you said that, I'm like, he was cut because nobody. Because Thompson's one of the less, it's like the background character. It's the same because it's so cool. And I'm guessing, I mean, I know it's been like over a decade, but like,
Yeah,
do you remember kind of what was there before of him before it was gone?
I don't. And I wasn't directly working on the shots themselves. That's a different department. So I mean, I got to see what we call dailies, which are daily renders of everything. I don't remember I remember him being in other scenes, but I don't remember which ones. But yeah, like the last time I watched the film, I remember him just sort of, he was more like static, right? He was sort of standing behind Optimus in there was a sunlight shot, a sunset shot. I remember he was in a couple of other shots, but he definitely had some action scenes. There was definitely more transformation involved, and we didn't really get to see much of it, which is a shame.
Yeah, I say one of the best designs in Dark of the Moon that there was. Now,
Yeah.
this is a question about him specifically. I don't know if you know this, but and it doesn't matter if you don't. But have you seen the fifth film? Because it kind of gives
Which one is
context.
it?
It was the last one Bay did. It was like the Knights. It's not really amongst Bayverse fans. We didn't really
I
like
don't
it
think I've
too
seen
much.
it. I don't
Okay,
think I've seen
so
it.
this is gonna have a little bit of explanation to it. So we don't see Topspin again in the fourth film, but he comes back in the fifth film. But for some reason, he has a completely different head that was used from a different character.
Oh,
And the
weird.
theory that fans have came up with is that since Topspin did not have a voice actor, his mouth was never rigged to speak. And
Right.
that's kind of the theory they came up with. But I was always because since you built
It's
him,
possible.
so you
That is
think that could be it?
possible, but it could also be just budgetary. I don't remember who did the visual effects for that movie. I don't think it was ILM. Could be a budgetary thing. That yeah, maybe they had a head that was rigged and they would just fit right on there. I can't imagine it was anything to do with the voice itself, but yeah, it could be that. Making these models is time consuming. Just making the head for Sentinel, for example, probably took me a couple of weeks of solid work. So if you budget that per hour on with an expensive artist, it adds up. And I think that one was a little bit lower budget. That film, I'm guessing, reading between the lines a little bit.
Yeah, because it's weird because they had a completely beautiful head usable. I mean,
Right.
because I know you talked about rigging with Sentinel. I mean, like I said, it's over a decade. Like, do you remember specifically if he had a physical rig just to speak? I assume he would.
Yes, yeah, you have to. Yeah, especially
Okay.
with him because I don't remember, but his lips very segmented. They actually made of separate pieces, quite a lot of pieces. So just to have those moving, yeah, it has to have a proper facial rig. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's
Yeah,
kind of a
and even for the
mystery.
eyes, the eyes that are moving, like there's a lot of stuff. The facial rig is more important in a lot of ways than the body rig. It's where you look, right? So yeah, there was a lot of work went into that. I'm not a rigger, so I didn't do it, but yeah, there was a full rig for, I think, for all of the Transformers. Honestly, maybe not for Topspin. I'm not that familiar with that one, but I'm assuming most of them had a full rig. But yeah, if it was known that he wasn't going to speak, then I can imagine you would take shortcuts there.
I see. So then another thing, when it comes to a good old Topspin here, is I guess between him and Sentinel, because of the two main characters you did, which one did you like more, or you had more fun creating?
I had more fun probably with Topspin, but I think I would say I got more out of working on Sentinel, and I think mostly because, well, firstly because it's kind of nice to know that he's in all the major shots.
Hmm.
So it's good to see you work up there, but I think also I'd kind of at that point got more confident with the tools and the processes, because they were the previous movies I'd worked on at ILM. We have shared, or we had shared tools across the entire studio, but there were some very specific ones for Transformers, so it was kind of a big learning process for me. So by the time I got to work on him, I pretty much knew it inside out. So it went a lot more smoothly for me, I think. So that's probably a big part of it. And I just like his design anyway. I like fire trucks and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, so cool. So I guess another thing that you're most notably, created was Optimus's jetpack. And
right,
interestingly enough, though that design was not the final, there's
yeah.
a toy of it that came out, which is actually
Uh-huh.
really cool. So I guess, did you end up creating the final one? Because a lot of that actually would become in the final model. It was just kind of
I'd
redone
need
for
to look
these.
at the final shot again, because I don't remember exactly how it looked. But I did a version. Whether it's the final one or not, I'm not 100% sure. I need to go back and cross-reference. But I worked on it for quite a while. Um, so what went on there was we got some very sketchy concept, which I started working on. And this was a pretty quick turnaround. I think Sentinel probably took me. People like to ask. The first pass from start to rigging was probably about 6 weeks. I think with the jetpack it was probably 2 weeks tops. And there's quite a lot of detail on there. Even actually, you probably don't see a lot of it in the film. I got a very sketchy concept for that, so I started working on that until we got the final concept. And the final concept was him actually on the jetpack, kind of flying.
Hmm.
But I seem to remember we also had a version without him, right? Because you just in Photoshop you could just hide that layer, so we can just see, just the jetpack. And it was like again, a sort of a 3/4 view, like slightly above. And we needed to send renders like for approval to the studio, to the director. And I can clearly remember sending a really nice high detail render of that along with concept art back to Michael Bay, and then hearing nothing for quite a while. And then one day one of the production team came around and said to me, "Oh, we got some feedback on the jetpack." And I said, "Oh yeah, how did it go?" And I think the exact words were, "He absolutely hates it."
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure that's the exact words. Sorry, Michael, not putting words in your mouth, but I'm pretty sure that's what I heard. And I said, "Interesting. Can I get something more constructive?" And they said, "It doesn't look enough like the concept." I was like, "I think it looks exactly like the concept."
Yeah, it looks
honestly.
pretty close.
So we got together with the FX soup and we looked at it, and they literally told me, if you haven't posed the object, the character, whatever it might be, in exactly the same pose as it is in the concept art, Michael will just reject it. And I guess that was the problem. That it was, I just done a regular 3/4 render, thinking, you can read between the lines here a little bit. What I ended up having to do was put the concept into my 3D package into Maya and literally pose it as best I could. Obviously, the concept doesn't have a correct camera lens, right? It's just done concept art, so it's approximate. So we had to approximate it with a lens that more or less was the right length, so it would fit. And I put it so it was as overlaid as possible, and I took a screenshot of that or a render of that, and I put them side by side, and that was the way it got approved. Was literally by doing that. I didn't do anything to the model at all. It was just how it was posed.
That's wild. I
Yeah,
mean, it's crazy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
And
what you got to deal with sometimes.
Yeah, because I remember when you said that earlier, I'm like, how does that not look like the concept? It's literally the concept, just a different
Yeah,
angle.
yeah, yeah.
But I know another thing that you worked on was this gun, and if I recall correctly, this was used by Crowbar and Crankcase in the film. So, what was the process with that? Because it's such an interesting design.
Was that which one was that? The one with like the tubes and the pipes around it?
Yes, it
Yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah. Again, that was just a three-quarter concept, and that was a really sketchy concept I had for that one. And I literally just modeled it as best I could and added some of my own stuff to that one. That we got away with a little bit more on the weapons, because they're sort of secondary. You don't see them as much, and they tend to be covered in VFX anyway. So yeah, just process the same as modeling anything. Really started out with a very low detail block out. Got the shapes and the silhouette and the form, so it looked like it matched the concept as best as possible, and then just detailed it out. And that one went, I think, first pass was just straight through the pipe and done, and I didn't see it again. If your model doesn't come back to you, it's usually a good sign. So that one went through, and I never saw it again. It went through your texture, because I was only making models. I didn't. ILM had a very specific texture department. Surfacing we call it, and also a model department. So I did the models and I sent it to texturing, and then it went to rig, and it didn't come back. So I was okay with that. But yeah, it was very much the same thing, just like I say, with a little bit less specific concept.
That's pretty cool. And I always wanted to have a figure like with that weapon, but unfortunately, Hasbro for some reason never made it. They gave them their other weapons, which were like these spike bombs that came out of their back, but the guns they
Yep.
just never gave them. I always wanted
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Was the spike bomb the grenade? Was it like a long?
Yes, it was a
Because
long
so
thing.
I did that as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
you did as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Say I did that at the same time as I did the weapon you mentioned. Yeah, I did those both of those.
And I'm curious if that, and I could be wrong on this because I'm basing what I remember from the film. Was that meant to be the light bar on those
I have no
characters?
idea, actually. I genuinely don't know. I was told it was supposed to be like a grenade or something. I seem to remember, but
Yeah,
maybe,
it was
yeah,
a grenade in the film. It just like flashed
yeah,
red and blue, but they were like
right.
FUV police vehicles. So I assumed, okay, is it
Okay.
also the light bar as well? Like,
Yeah, they never told me that. Yeah, yeah. We didn't really get as into the lore as I think a lot of people think we do, even on Star Wars, where we did a little bit more. Um, it was, I hate saying it's just a job because, there's people out there who do really mundane things, which are just jobs. But sometimes when you've got like, this got to be done in a week, you just blast on through it. And yeah, I didn't hear anything about that. So it's quite possible.
see, that's awesome. I didn't know you did that, so it's cool that that got
Yeah,
brought up.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I know another thing that you're credited was the simulations. I know you touched on it a bit, and I remember in one of your sizzle wheels, you showed the scene where like the building collapses. So
Right.
I'm kind of, could you go kind of explain like what exactly is the simulation part of this?
Yeah, so that was the sims are typically done by a very specific technical artist. And these days, mostly is done in a piece of software called Houdini, which some of your viewers might know. I believe that we didn't do it in Houdini. I think we could have, but I think it was a little early. So I think we probably did it in Maya with our own in-house sim tools, which we had. We had a suite of tools for that stuff. So essentially, I built like the skeleton of the big giant building in Chicago, which is the structure. So it's the brick essentially, right? The walls, and then the ground floor, and then all of the glass, all of the window. Each individual window is a separate model. Each window surround is a separate model, and then out of that stuff with some concrete, we built like individual floors, and then we could just stack the floors and maybe put some variation in there. And then all of that final model, which was really heavy. It's surprising because it's essentially just a big cube, but because of all the little individual bits, and then when you shatter things, it becomes very heavy because what's essentially just a flat plane for a piece of geometry for glass becomes a lot more complicated when it's shattered. So yeah, we I sent that model, and there's quite a bit of back and forth between model and tech art for this process. But I sent that off as sim, and it's essentially, they'll crack and fracture. There's actually some specific tools called fracture, which will put like an actual fracture through the object, and then it'll simulate it sort of collapsing. And it's a very lengthy process. There's no rigging involved as such, not usually. I did to say I worked on a movie called Rango, and the same process for some sims in that. But yeah, it's as simple as that really, is build the model out of lots of individual pieces. The tech artist typically wants it presented in a certain way for his sim, and that's why the glass is separate so it can shatter. And then he does the fracture and the shatter, and then we review it. If I need to tweak the model, I will, and he can just go back and replace it and resim. That's basically the process. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that scene was the highlight because you just see
it's a
the
good one.
driller like just big old worm just crashing and
Yeah.
stuff falling out. I remember there's like at least in the special features, they have like 5 minutes just dedicated to just how they did this, and it's insane. I mean, it's
Yeah, I did
awesome.
actually start work on that worm. Um, and I think it was again when I was waiting for some other assignment, but I did start working on that because, I was the only guy in ILM at the time who come from a games background, and that
Hmm.
worm's extremely complicated. So they wanted someone to just come in and do like a very low res, like detail-free pass just to get the general feel. So I started doing that, making like essentially game res pieces that we could kit bash into that worm. And I did
Okay.
I did just the front bit. And then that went off to another artist and he took control of it all once we blocked that out.
Now, I could be wrong on this, so I believe with these game res models, they might have been used in the previs department potentially.
Potentially. So again, I'm sorry to get off of Transformers a little bit, but Rango, the previous movie I worked on, we did a lot of that there. So you certainly with something like Rango, which is not a visual effects movie, right? It's an animated feature, everything's CG. It's a lot heavier because everything's CG, right? There's not an actual backplate. So for that movie and several other ones, we do like animatic res models. So, for example, in Rango, the town itself, when you're looking through the town, there's a lot of CG going on in there. And the stuff that's in the background past a certain distance, you really don't need that high-res render, right? So we
Hmm.
do what we do in games, which is called LODs, level of detail. So the stuff that's in the background is really, really basic textured models. That's how I started off most of my models in Rango and some of them in Transformers as well. And they go into pre-production, you're right, because when the animators are animating the characters, they want to see what they're animating to, like buildings or whatever, but they don't care about the detail, right? As long as the form and the volume and the shape's correct, the doorways are correct, for example, they don't care. So it can be as low res as possible. And it's more advantageous to them anyway, because then in the 3D software, it runs at a much better frame rate. So yes, absolutely. We would do that because it's, the models are just too heavy to run in real time if you do an animation.
Yeah, and I remember. Okay, this is not for Dark Moon, but for the previous film, there's this
Uh,
guy. He was a pre-visualization supervisor. I think his name is Steve Yamamoto, and they said that they basically had more runtime of just those animatic shots than the actual films themselves. That's crazy.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, yeah. And like I say, with Rango, I know for sure some of them. So I actually did game res models for some of the buildings in Rango that I know for a fact were in the movie. It's hard to pick out because they, like say, they become background, and then you get some depth of field. But I can clearly remember doing one of the smaller buildings. I think it was a building called Peanuts, Corn, and Hair, which is there's an interesting story behind that. And I did it like with a single. Again, if anybody knows what this means, a single 1K texture, it's just a small texture for the whole building. And I remember some of the artists at ILM saying, "How did you do that?" And I was confused. I was like, "Do what?" And they said, "Do all that in one texture." And I was like, I just laughed and said, "That's what we do in games. We're used to doing that." So it was an interesting experience taking that background into working in VFX.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty cool, and I kind of want to touch more on that because as you said, you were the only person who worked on games before. I guess the only person in the department that did that. So I guess how did that, like, besides with the point of the 1K texture, how did that like help with Transformers and like with that background?
Not the texturing so much, but like you say, example of the worm and things like that, it just allows us to rapidly prototype things rather than going like straight into doing detail. If you're doing a lot of detail, it just takes a long time. Even if the shape isn't massively different, you actually have to put in a lot of extra polygons just to support it when it renders. Because we do this thing called subdivision surfaces, which essentially means that the closer to the camera the model is, the more subdivided it becomes, so therefore the smoother it becomes, right? And you need to actually put a lot of structure into the model to make that work. If you're not bothered about that and you really want something that's just functional for the animators or just to do a previs, don't care about how it looks, it's more about the feel, then just being able to rapidly prototype and put things together quickly is super, super helpful. So, did a lot of that. Not as much on Transformers, but, even going back to when I said at the start there, I didn't, but the supervisor put together some very low res block out of everything. That's the sort of thing that we did quite a bit of in Rango on some other movies. Literally, we don't really care about is it like geometry perfect? Is it going to render perfectly? We care about how it looks, right? When it's all put together, does the overall silhouette and form feel good? You can tell a lot by just having just polygons rather than the smaller detail.
That's pretty cool. And this is an interesting point that you said with the, like when it came to the rendering, because I know with your and on your art station, you have like these shots of Sentinel and Topspin, which are really cool, but they have like a completely they're not 100% fully done. I think with the textures. So was that like just an early version of the texture or like something like that?
Yeah, I didn't do textures like I said earlier. That comes from a different department. So the stuff that I get is typically my what we call turntable. So that's when we finish a model, or even when we're in production and we're looking at in dailies, because every day they have a review first thing in the morning, and it doesn't always include your work. It depends how much stuff you've got to review. But you'll typically get called down to the daily suite, and you'll sit there with the producer and many other people on the project, sometimes the director, and they'll just play your daily, right, and take some review notes, and then you go back and fix that stuff. And the stuff that you would have seen would have been a daily render. So, model is finished, or model's 80% finished, and we push it through the render pipeline. And there's some automated scripts there that'll actually render it in a very specific way, which is for dailies. So that'll be the stuff you saw. And it's basic placeholder materials. It's more about the object. And the scripts kind of put it into a very formulated lighting rig so that every model, when it comes out, looks the same. If we're randomly putting lights in there, then everything's going to look different. So we try to review with the same lighting rig, the same background, which is fairly neutral, because it's about concentrating on the model rather than anything else. It's going to confuse the issue, right? So that's pretty much what you saw.
That's cool, yeah, because I've seen what you meant by that, the lighting, because they actually would use that same shot for several different films.
Yes.
And a fun fact is that in the 4 film, they have like these playing cards of like the Transformers because the CIA was after them, so they kind of like get the kill cards, and they would use that exact same shot, so you could actually see, because in one of those shots you see like Bumblebee's Camaro, so it's funny because there's a thing of Ironhide, and in the background you see Bumblebee's Camaro. Like, how does that work? That's pretty funny.
Yeah, that'll just come from the render scripts. Yeah, there's some of the tech artists basically made those, but we as artists, some of the artists are like more technically minded than others. So some artists will get a technical artist to do that for them, and other people, like I have a tech background, so I would just send those renders myself. But yeah, it's a really nice system. It's super easy. In games, it's a lot more manual. There, in film, because they've been doing it for such a very long time, they know what they're doing. They have the tools, they have the pipeline set up, and it was really nice learning all that stuff. It was definitely a change from working in games. In a way a better change, and in a way not so much, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah. So I guess once the film finally came out, when it came to your work, seeing it on screen, I guess what was the thing that blew you most away?
You know what? I think just seeing like final animation, like I think animation, especially with character stuff, when you're used to watching your character just standing in what we call a rest pose or a T pose, we call it, it becomes like very dry, and uninspiring, I guess. Even if you're kind of happy with your model after 6 weeks of looking at it every day, you're sort of done with it. But then when you see him actually come to life, and you start to see a little bit of that in the dailies when the animations come in, but seeing the final thing and how it edits together, because even seeing those individual daily shots, they're cool, but you've got no real point of reference about how they fit into the story or the movie. So seeing all that stuff together, and then obviously with the actual effects, blasts and fire and all that kind of stuff, which we usually don't get to see because that's compositing is last in the pipeline. So by that time, we've either left the studio or we've moved on to another project. So we typically don't get to see that stuff until it's final, unless we really go digging for it. So seeing all that, like him fighting, him blasting, any of that stuff was great. Just it makes him feel integrated into the world, and that's always a magical process for me. It's something I've never really got involved with, that whole composite side of things, but compositors really bring all of our work to life and make it feel like it's a living, breathing world. So that was really cool.
Yeah, and I mean that's awesome because when I see Dark of the Moon and I compare this to like other projects that have come out, in more recent times, I honestly think it looks, I'd say, better than some of the stuff that you see now. It's crazy.
It holds up really well, and there's a lot of complaints, isn't there, about CG? I've got some friends who hate anything with computer graphics. And sometimes I have to agree. There's a lot of really low budget computer graphics stuff out there now. I was watching a trailer earlier on for a movie. I forget what it's called now, Under Paris or something like that. It's called, and it's about a killer shark in the sewers in Paris. And I just was thinking, okay, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but the CG just doesn't look great. And I think our CG looked, I could be biased, but I think our CG looked really nice. And that's, partially because ILM are just an awesome company. But, I do think a lot of CG has moved into other locations, other studios, purely on budget. And that's not always the right decision,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, ILM when it came to Transformers, probably the best ones that could do it because there was the most recent one called Transformers: Rise of the Beast. It was done by a different studio, I believe it was MPC. They did a
Oh, it was
good
MPC.
job for what they did, but you could tell it just wasn't ILM quality.
Yeah, it's interesting in film. Like I always thought I didn't know how they managed this process at all. I wouldn't have wanted to do it, but a lot of the shots, even on Dark of the Moon, were through different studios, right? So it's not typically not one studio does everything. And sometimes there's like 10 or 15 studios involved, and it can be, the frame stores and the NPCs and the mill, and any of those guys can get involved in some shots. And I think that must be a real challenge for the visual effects supervisors to make sure that all of the art from all those different studios using different tools, because they don't share the tools, feels like it sits together. It is a challenge. I think I've worked on a couple of feature films where we did all of it, but they were typically the animated feature films rather than visual effects.
Yeah, because that does jog my memory. Because I think Dark of the Moon had, I know Digital Domain was part of it.
Right. Yeah, I worked at Digital Domain briefly, but not on any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot.
There's a lot out there. Yeah,
because I think for Rise of the Beast it was only just MPC, and I think towards the end there was another studio that jumped in because they were falling behind with production. So it's wild. I mean, I'm just it's like a 13 it's a 13-year-old film, and it just holds up so well. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's 13 years has gone quickly, but yeah, it does. I mean, I don't watch most of the stuff I worked on, but I see clips of it here and there, and occasionally it's on cable or whatever, and I jump in and look at it, and I agree. I think it holds up really well.
It truly does. And I guess another thing, because I know we kind of went back and forth on this. And I don't know if this interview might have helped or jogged your memory on some things. I know you said you worked on some other things for Dark of the Moon that you may not remember, like anything that might come to mind.
So one thing that does come to mind is there was, and I don't remember what we called it now, but there was like a giant, like a weapons array.
Optimus Prime's trailer, that circular thing.
Yeah, that's it. So I worked on the first pass of that, and we had very little concept for that, I remember. And it was a pretty complex model, and a lot of it was really up to me to sort of figure out. I mean, we had the shape, figure out how it worked. So it was a little bit of a head scratcher, honestly. And I did a first pass of most of it. I don't think it was ever finished, because I think I was doing that probably around the time I ended up doing the jetpack. I have a render of it somewhere, and I don't know where. I'd have to try to dig it out. But yeah, I worked on that, and I worked on that for a few weeks, and it was kind of fun because it was, although it was high pressure, because it was sort of given to me to really figure it out. I enjoyed doing that process a lot. So I did that. I mentioned the grenade thing earlier on. What else did I do? That's probably the bulk of it. I'm sure something else will come to mind. But yeah, that was the one thing that, there was the big ticket item. And I don't think that made it into the movie, did it? I don't remember.
It did.
Oh, it did?
It was like, it's such a cool design, because Optimus trailer is essentially like a box. And then it becomes all round. And then the jetpack that is on like the top of it, of all these other weapons. It's such a cool design.
That's right. I remember it being on the top. Yeah, I probably haven't watched that film properly for maybe since 13 years ago. But yeah, so I did work on that, and I know I didn't finish it because I remember not finishing it, but I got a good way with it, and so who knows what happened to that? But I'm glad it made it into the film.
It did. I mean, it's just crazy, because how do you turn a box into a circle? It's a wild design.
It's the magic of VFX, right? Lots of motion blur.
It's crazy. And I guess one of the last things I do want to touch upon that you said with the skeletons, how much, because I've seen only very few images of like other robots, and there's like a lot of detail that you actually never get to see in the film. So like, is that more complex to do than the outer shells of the characters?
Yes. No, the outer shells I think are the most important bit, because they sell the shape, and they sell, the idea that it comes from this particular vehicle. You need recognizable shapes in those big pieces. Otherwise, your brain doesn't connect one to the other, right?
Hmm.
So they're important that you spend most of the time on that because of that reason, because they form the main silhouette. But, Transformers, the whole nature of it, even from the title sequences, everything's moving and transforming, right? And to give things that are big, like, Sentinel or Optimus, that sense of scale, it actually relies on all the small stuff, right? It's
Hmm.
kind of like Star Wars, right? The Star Destroyer. The reason Star Destroyer looks massive is because of all the little tiny greeblies that are all over it, right? They give the brain that sense of scale and connection. So it's really similar with that. You need to put all those bolts and everything in. Whereas in games, we would we would never put all the screws and the rivets and stuff in Transformers, well, in film in general, you have a much bigger budget for polygons, so you can put that stuff in, and if it's in geometry, it sells it better, especially if it's something that can move like a spring that can contract, something as simple as that. So that's really complicated because it's quite easy just to make like a piston, for example, but then
Hmm.
a piston alone is not enough. It needs lots and lots of greeblies around it and extra detail just to sell it as a busy, moving kind of living organism. So that's definitely the most complicated, and it can be kind of frustrating because it feels like, oh my God, I've been adding stuff for days and days, and it feels empty. Like I remember working on Sentinel's upper arm, and I seemed to put in so much work into that, and then I would just move the camera a little bit, and I could see daylight right through. And you don't want to see that; you want to see like a lot of internal structure without that daylight. So just constantly moving things around, adding things, scaling things. It is time consuming. It's exhausting, actually, mentally exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, because they're not like a basic silhouette. They have all these pieces coming out, and that has to have armor under. I mean, I don't even know how you guys do it. It's insane.
And you really need to connect those pieces, even if you're not sure you're going to see them, right? You need to know that big shoulder pad, whatever you want to call it, it has got some connection to it underneath, right? It's bolted in some way. So if the camera, because most of the time we had no idea where the camera was going to go, so we had to cover all eventualities. And if the camera just looks at the wrong angle and that piece looks like it's just floating, that's not going to work, right? So then we need to go in there and add that little connecting piece, the rivets, the bolts, whatever it needs. So yeah, that's actually probably the most challenging thing is not knowing your shot, before you actually get to work on it.
Yeah, and there's also, like you said, there's a lot of experimentation because you only have a concept to go off of, and then you got to expand that concept while keeping its core DNA.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the whole process from start to finish is pretty complicated, but it's fun. I mean, like I say, I complain about things like that a little bit, but I could be doing a lot worse jobs. So it was really enjoyable, the whole project, honestly.
And then another question, I think you might have answered this already, but I believe the model that took you the most amount of time was Sentinel.
Yeah, I think I was like say about 6 weeks, but that was only for the first pass.
Okay.
And we ended up coming back, like I said, with the rigging to do quite a bit of. There was probably 2 weeks of to and fro with the rigging, so I would say it was probably about 8 weeks all in all. And then again, like we mentioned earlier, there was probably some edits done after I left, after my contract ended. I don't know how much. I think the majority of him looks more or less like I left him, but I'm sure there's some changes that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, majority it looks the same. Because I first saw, I'm like, oh my god, it's a previous render Sentinel. We don't have this on file, and this
Right,
came out. I think you uploaded that last year. I'm like, oh my god, Dark and Moon stuff coming out in like 2023. What is this? It's crazy.
I probably got other stuff lying around that I don't know. I have CDs full of stuff that some is probably just the same, but it's just earlier versions, like work in progress versions and that kind of stuff. But we kind of we have to sort of be careful. We have to formally request things. You can't really just go and take work. So most of what I got would have been requested from, I forget there was a special contact person in all of the studios I worked at, where you can request stuff for your show reel. So I'm not sure how much pre-final version I would have. I might have some. I need to look around.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. So then I guess since it's a contract based, you don't own that. It's the studio who has it, and you have to request it if you want to
Yeah,
feature it.
yeah, absolutely. And it's a little looser in games typically. They don't like, in a lot of ways in games there's a lot more paranoia, because games take longer to come out. Some games are
Mhm.
like 3-4 years. So there's a little bit of paranoia about that. They don't want, and I understand it, especially if it's their own IP. They don't want that to get leaked. So once it's a public domain, right? It's a film that's been released or it's a game that you can buy. It's a little bit easier to get access to that stuff. But when it's still being in production, yeah, it's pretty hard. And so if you're a contractor and you're not there at the end, that just becomes a slightly more complex process.
I see. Now, this is like the last question I have, and I don't know if you would know this specifically, but since it's related to Sentinel, I'm going to ask it. So in the original ending to Dark of the Moon, it's completely different to what happened in the final film. It's actually where Sentinel actually fights off both Optimus and Megatron, and then he eventually dies of his own hubris because Optimus shoots the rust cannon. He falls apart. But they changed it for some reason. I believe it was due to the Amazon leaks, but I'm curious if any word of why that ending changed ever got to you.
No, I knew nothing about that. And, again, maybe, I don't remember when that was changed, but that could have been after I left. I doubt it. I guess it was probably, because I was there fairly close to the end, so it was probably known. But again, that's probably not my department. So my models just went off, and then I think I was even looking at working on another project by that time, which never came through. I was actually supposed to work on oh my goodness, it was an alien film. I forget what the heck it was called now. Anyway, I was supposed to work on this other film, and it was delayed and delayed and delayed. So I actually ended up moving to Lucas Animation. So I stayed within the same company, but I worked on an animated feature film there for George. So I think it was probably done after I left at that point. So I wasn't aware of it.
No worries. Yeah, it's such a mystery because a lot of fans think the original ending was better than what we got because Megatron actually surrenders and teams up with Optimus, which is something you never get to see in these films.
Sounds interesting. Yeah, I would like to have seen that.
All right, guys. Well, that was our interview with Mr. Shaun Stephenson. Mr. Stephenson, thanks again for coming on to the Tribune. I know the fans are going to love hearing your story, and I think they're going to really appreciate what you had to say today.
Oh, no, my pleasure. It was really fun. Thanks for having me on. Sorry I didn't have much information about some of the questions you asked, but hopefully it was a little bit insightful anyway for everyone.
It's the first time I'm hearing most of this information, so
okay, wonderful.
I'd call it a dub,
Nice one. Okay, thanks very much again. Have a good one, Jason. Take care.
You too.